We've been going through some readings in the book of Genesis throughout this fall, and I know they're foreign. I know there's names in there that we don't need to remember and are hard to say and all that, and yet those stories are so foundational for our understanding of this world, why it is the way it is, and as well as what God does about it. And really what I would encourage you, as your kids are confused, as you're confused maybe, I know as I'm confused, what we do is we make this big Bible a lot smaller and a lot simpler by saying, what does it teach me about Jesus? And then by extension, what does it teach me about my life in Jesus? And that's what I hope to do today as we talk about Abram and Lot, and also this topic of ambition that you see up there. Ambition is good. Having goals, that's very good. We should set big goals from time to time, and we should strive, and we should think about our future. Okay, that's a good thing to do. And also, as we talk about our life as Christian and we think about our goals, I want to recognize that there's some freedom in the kind of goals that we have, and there's some freedom in the lives we live. God does not have a thus saith the Lord moment for every situation we're going to encounter or every decision we're ever going to make, for that matter. There's a lot of freedom. And sometimes even good Christian people can disagree on something, and it's no big deal. All right, so having ambition is good. There's freedom in the Christian life, and yet I do want to have you ponder this. How do you make choices? And how do you set your path for the future? How do you attain your ambition? I think it has to be deeper than just, I do what I want to do, I don't do what I don't want to do. Though sometimes that's a very reasonable way of approaching things. I think it needs to be deeper than our feelings. I think it needs to be deeper than what we're comfortable with or not comfortable with. All these things change over time. There's got to be something more firm that drives our decisions. How will this decision affect my life with God? Can I do what I'm setting out to do and still be faithful to God? And will I still have sight of how faithful He is to me? And also, not just that, but how is what I'm about to do going to affect those around me? My decisions matter, not just to me, but to others. And so how will this decision affect my life with God? How will this decision affect my life with my neighbor? Those should be serious questions that we ask and consider when we set out to do something. So something might be a very reasonable choice, a good choice, but we say, you know what, now's not the right time because I can't do it and still serve my neighbor. And so I want to look at those questions today in light of the scriptures. Most of you are here today, I hope, and I believe, because you want to set your choices that way. You want your life to go that way. You want to be faithful people. You didn't show up here this morning because you don't care about God or you don't care about other people. You do care. And you want to be faithful. You want to follow. You want to trust. But I think that as we do that, most days, most ways, I would even suggest, pretty good. Pretty good. And especially in comparison with many decisions that are made in the world, the decisions made amongst the people in this room, I'd argue, generally better. But be on guard about that thing. Or maybe those few things that are blind spots for you. That maybe you don't notice at first, but that the devil is tempting you into believing that if you don't have those things, if they're absent from your life somehow, you won't be happy or you couldn't go on living. Ask yourself, what is that thing in your life? I venture a guess we all have it. I came across a fascinating story this week about a guy, a Christian man, seeking to be faithful to the Lord and looking like it by most regards. But he had that thing in his life. First thing that happened to him, though, really remarkable, sad event in his life, is 3 of his children died in an accident, all at the same time. So just put yourself in his shoes. Almost unfathomable. And the grief and the despair would be absolutely huge. Now this guy got up in front of his church and said, I trust in the Lord. He is good. I cherish the time I had with my kids. I'm not mad at God. I believe they're with him. My heart is full with thanksgiving and joy and even happiness. Now, pretty remarkable thing to be able to say that in a situation like that. And so you'd hold him up and say, that is a guy who has amazing faith, great faith I could never attain. Now, the thing that really caught me, though, about this guy, another sad tragedy in his life, is that later on, some point, he said, I don't love my wife anymore. I have affection for this other woman, co-worker. And I need her in my life. She's going to make me feel important. She's going to care for me. And she rejected his advances. And the guy was so filled with grief that he went and committed suicide. Now, what is it? What is it that allowed a man to have rock solid faith and trust in God when his 3 children die, but he couldn't have it when this woman wouldn't go out with him? That was his thing. That was his thing that he was using to really save him, to really make him feel important and special. For a lot of us, if you flip that story around, we'd put ourselves in that position and say, no, really, it's our kids that we're using to make us feel important and special and meaningful. But for him, his thing, it was that woman. The devil tempted him to come and say, I couldn't live without it. This is truth. We are all looking for meaning and acceptance. We all want to feel like our lives matter. We want meaning, we want purpose, we want to be important, even in small circles, perhaps maybe for some it's on a wider scale. But there's nobody who isn't looking for a life that is void of significance. We want to go back to what it was like for that short period of time where Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden felt totally loved, totally cared for, totally secure. They communed with God in a way that we can't fully see or grasp now. We all want that. And the devil knows that, and so he's always using something to try to get us to believe that we can find it in that thing. For a lot of men, it's their jobs. For women, it's their looks and the affection of another man. For many people, obviously, there's money and our kids' accolades and whatever it is. We're using those things to say, I'm important, I'm valuable, I'm accepted, I'm good. All right? Usually what the devil's doing in the lives of believers is he's coming in and he's using good things to do that. Everything I just mentioned, jobs, money, kids, grandkids, whatever, they're all good things. They're absolutely good things. But they become idols, and they can become bad things when they're misused and when they're disordered. When we try to get from them what God says we can only get from him. And we can only get our meaning from him. We can only get our purpose from him. We can only be fully loved and embraced from him. Abram, in his life, came to understand that and trust that even when it was hard to see that. And we hear a story today from the scriptures about Abram and Lot and how they both approach a different decision. Let's go to the next slide. They have ambition. Abram let his ambition be based on what God told him. Lot let his ambition based on what he could see in front of him. quick context for you in this story. Abram had been given a promise from God that he was going to inherit this big chunk of land and that he'd become a nation and that nation would be blessed, and actually the whole earth would be blessed through him and his offspring. And God called him to follow. And Abram followed, even though God said, leave your country, leave your family, leave your animals, all of that. Now, then a famine happens where God leads him, and Abram and his family find themselves in Egypt. And in Egypt, God provides for their needs. So much so that when they start coming back to this land called Canaan, they have a tremendous amount of animals. So many animals, actually, that there wasn't enough land to support the cattle that he had and that his nephew Lot had. Now, Abram really should have been able to say to his nephew Lot, I'm going to take this here, and you're going to have to go and fend for yourself. But Abram did not want to have strife with his nephew. People were starting to argue about the land, who gets this, who gets that. Abram didn't want that. He wanted to keep the peace. And he also knew there was pagans around who didn't know God, and so he didn't want to provide a bad example. And so he says to Lot, okay, Lot, you go and pick what you want, and I'll go somewhere else. And I'll make do. I'll trust God is going to provide for me. Lot really should have recognized that his blessings were a result of his place in the family with Abram. He should have deferred to Abram. He should have trusted in God's promise that had been given. But instead, what he sees in front of him is this land. And he sees that it's well watered. And the Bible says that he equated it to being like the garden of God, to being like paradise. And so Lot goes ahead and he says, I'm gonna go over here. And I'm gonna separate myself from the family, and I'm gonna go and live over here, and this land is gonna provide for me what I want from it and what I think I should get from it. And then all kinds of chaos ensues. And there's 3 important lessons that I want to just quickly go through with you about what I think we learn here. And I think it helps us approach our decision making a little bit differently as we walk through this life and as we journey through faith. And the first lesson that we learn is that you cannot have paradise without God. It says that Lot looked at it and it looked like paradise. It looked like the garden of God. He thought he was going to go to this well-watered land and live happily ever after. Scriptures make clear that's not what happened. There were evil, wicked people living in the land. Eventually, they take Lot captive, and he needs to be rescued. Here's the truth that Lot learned. If God's not there, it's not good. It's as simple as that. You can't have paradise without God, because nothing is meant to provide for us what God can give to us, not even the land. And eventually, even that land that Lot goes to, it's destroyed, showing that God is the one who's ultimately in control, and that nothing can do what he is intended to do. But we're always using people and things to try and fill us up. We live, truth be told, and I know I get the sense sometimes we get tired of hearing it, but we live, truth be told, at a time of unprecedented wealth. We can talk about recessions and stock markets and bad economies all we want. That's all relative. Here in Livingston County, Michigan, year 2014, we have unprecedented wealth. And yet, are we a contented people? The answer is very, very clearly no. We are continually grasping for more. We have so many blessings, And yet I witness firsthand anxiety, fear, and discontentment. It's there creating a hole in our heart that only God himself can fill. Ask yourself this honest question. And I'm going to be the first one to say, I'm not sure my answer is always yes, all right? But answer this question. Could you lose everything? And could you lose everybody today? And still say like Job did, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Could you? Do you trust him that much? Do you believe his promise to you of an eternal future that much? I'm not saying that we aren't going to go through troubles and that we shouldn't be sad during those times. But would we see our life as still worth living if we lost everything and everyone? Or like that man I referenced earlier, would we say there's no point in going on? I was talking to someone the other day, and they moved, and I think it's because of where they moved, they're having trouble getting reasonable cable and internet. I'm not sure exactly what the deal is, but they don't have cable and internet, and have been living there for a while now. You know what my first instinct was when I heard that? Move again. What kind of life is that? Oh my goodness gracious. I started to shake. I'm like, seriously. And how sad is that? I admit it, but I say I need those things. I make blessings into needs. I take God's gifts and I turn them into must-haves when all I really need is God. And as a matter of fact, many of his blessings and many of his gifts to me are the very thing that often take me away from him and often take me away from people. Because that's how the devil works. He gets everything disordered. He turns good things into bad things. The thief on the cross, he was stripped naked. He had nothing in front of him except for the specter of his final breath. And yet, what does Jesus say to him that changes everything? Today, you're going to be with me in paradise. In other words, the second lesson learned is this. With God, wherever you are and wherever you are going is good. It's paradise. You can't have paradise without God. Wherever you're going, if God's there at the center, it's good. Do you believe that? I mean, really believe that what God says to do is good to do because you're with God as you do it. And what God says not to do, it's worth avoiding because most of all, what's important is being with God. Abram saw the same land that Lot saw. Abram saw this well-watered land. He saw it in front of him. But you know what he also knew? He also knew that God had made him a promise. And so he didn't need to live by sight. God had told him, I'm going to provide. I'm going to take care of you. You're going to end up being great. You're going to multiply it. You're going to be a blessing to others. It hadn't come to fruition yet. And as a matter of fact, it didn't look like it was going to. And over here looked a lot better. And so Lot said, I'm going for it. And Abram said, I'm going to trust the Lord. And here's another question that I just think is worth pondering. You know, we ask, could you lose everything and still be okay? Here's another way of putting it. And this is what Abram believed. The answer was yes to this question for him. Do you believe that God is looking out for your best interests? So much so that you don't have to look out for your best interests. Can you answer yes to that? God calls us to this journey of faith. And he tells us something even more than Abram had. He tells us we're going to have the truest promised land, the greatest promised land, a heavenly home. And it's going to go on forever and ever and ever. And everything that our hearts ever desired and more is going to be met there. It's going to be a great banquet feast. The garden of God is going to be restored. And we can look back and trust that God is fulfilling that promise and has fulfilled that promise to us because we know about Jesus. Abram didn't even really have that full picture, and he believed. We have so much more and such a greater promise. And yet as we journey through faith, as we journey through life, ask yourself, do I believe God has my best interests at heart? God calls us to serve. And he doesn't say all these conditions. God calls us to give, and he doesn't give all these conditions. And yet, how do we often approach those calls? Well, if I listen to God, I'm not going to have enough time over here. And if I listen to God, I'm not going to have enough left over to be comfortable. You know what we're doing there is we're looking out for our best interests as we perceive them to be, because we are forgetting that God has our best interests at heart. If God did not spare his own son, Jesus Christ, for you, what good would he hold back from you? He holds nothing back from you for your own good. Even the discipline inflicted upon us, even the struggles in life, he uses for good. And he calls us to take heart, because though in this world there will be troubles, he has overcome the world. And so wherever you are, wherever you're going, if you're going with God at the center saying, I don't see it, God. I don't see how I can listen to you and things are going to turn out okay, but I know you, so I'm going to go. And God, over here, there's this really enticing lifestyle, and it looks a lot of fun. It looks like a lot more fun than coming and listening to that pastor at church and doing a bunch of service and even paying money for all the privilege of that. But because you say it and because I know you, I'll believe it. And I'll believe it's good. Wouldn't it be something if that was the life of faith that we all lived? To know so surely that what God has laid before us is exactly where we need and want to be. It hasn't always been like that. It hasn't. I worry about life without cable and internet. I sin daily in thought, word, and deed. I look out for my best interests. Sometimes I go my own way. And so do you. And so the most important lesson that we learn today is this. There's a way back. And it's continual. A continual renewal. God does not look at us make our mistakes or even look at us in flat-out rebellion and say, too bad, stinks to be you. That's how pragmatic modern Americans do it. But God says, no, I've seen everything you've done, and you've done it to yourself. I'm going to forgive. I'm going to shower you with grace. Abram went with just 318 men and the power of the Lord, and he rescues Lot. And Lot had done it to himself. He had been greedy, selfish, rebellious, and yet he's rescued. Pure grace from God, not treating him as his sins deserve. And God does not treat us as our sins deserve. We have the greater Abram. We have Jesus Christ upon the cross. And Jesus, next slide, Jesus upon the cross comes into our lives, and he tells us we're valued, so we don't have to find our value anywhere else. We're important, so we don't have to find our importance anywhere else. We're loved, so we don't need to care about this person loving us or that person loving us. It's a blessing when they do, but if they don't, we still say, I'm loved by the Lord. Jesus was forsaken so that we can be forgiven. Jesus went to the pit of hell so that we can one day be with him in paradise. Jesus offers us paradise. And you know how we get there? With him. We simply walk with him. And we believe that when we're with him, wherever we're going, wherever we are, it is good to be there. Here in the church, lots of confusion on the church in today's America. But really this pattern that we heard in this story about Abram and Lot is played out over and over and over again in our lives. We have a promise of a promised land. We have a call to bless all the nations of the earth through the message that we share and proclaim. Like Lot, sometimes we say, but I see some stuff over here. It looks pretty good. I'm going to go my own way. And yet we come back and we stand broken. We stand empty. We stand like beggars. We stand in front of the cross and we say, forgive me, renew me, restore me. And Jesus says, you are mine. And I will be with you always to the very end of the age, until that day I come back and I take you with me to your forever promised land. We get a glimpse and a taste of that promised land here in the church, the land of our time, whenever we receive forgiveness from God, whenever we extend it to others. It doesn't always seem like paradise. I know that. But with Jesus here, you know what we can do? Rather than offer a quick complaint, we can put the best construction on things and love our neighbor. With Jesus here, we can forgive the person who doesn't seem forgivable. We can love the person who doesn't seem lovable. Oh yeah, it looks easier to just go our own separate way. It looks easier to do our own thing. But looks can be deceiving. With Jesus, wherever we're going and whatever we're doing, hard as it is, it's good. It's good. It's good to be here. It's good to be amongst God's people, and it's good to be with Jesus. And so friends, you are loved, you are valued, you are important, and you are on a journey of faith to the promised land. May you stay firm until that day we see Jesus face to face. Amen.
Amen.
Let's gather our offerings now as a loving response to God's